if you look and travel around the globe, as I have the great fortune to do, and you follow what people are saying and doing, and you follow, including the Taggart lecture, it looks like the BBC in the person of you, BskyB in the person of James Murdoch, are sort of warily watching each other and saying, you say about them, my God, if they own all of the BskyB, the Murdoch Corporation, News Corp, which they're trying to do, plus all the newspapers, they're going to be a dominant force in Britain like nobody's ever been. That's what you say. He looks at...
Well, I think, by the way, if I may say so, it has the merit of being true, Charlie, as well, and it would be a concentration of ownership which wouldn't be allowed, I don't believe, in this country.
Okay, but let me come back. So, but he looks at you and he says, sort of, I mean, the BBC, they're too strong, they're too powerful, they're too arrogant, whatever he says, right?
That's a fair reflection of the debate.
That's pretty much where it is, right? Now, what is it you worry about with respect to Mr. Murdoch?
Well, I mean, firstly, I'm sure you did read that speech. I also went out of my way to say, I'd say that BskyB, which is significantly owned, and perhaps one day will be fully owned by News Corporation.
Probably.
This is a big pay operator in the UK, a satellite, direct-to-home satellite. Sky has been a great addition to the family of British broadcasting. They've innovated, they brought quality to bear, they brought sports that people couldn't get before. Sky is a success story which I think has improved British television. So I don't think anything BskyB does right now is a problem. I think there are questions for government and for the regulators to look at when you have so much power vested. I mean, Sky, in terms of its revenue, is already bigger than the BBC and will get much, much bigger because of the way in which pay TV is moving in that country. When you have a company which owns that, also has a straightforwardly dominant position in terms of national newspapers in the country, and also owns, by the way, one of Britain's biggest publishers, HarperCollins, there are questions about how you ensure plurality in that system. Now, this is not saying that the questions can't be satisfactorily answered, and it's not saying that big, successful companies should be punished. On the contrary. But I would say that the thing about the BBC is the BBC is a public institution which is in all sorts of ways held to account, and where...
How is it held to account?
Well, there's a governing body. Who hire,
which you report to,
which I report to, who hire and fire the Director General. By the way, about half of all Director Generals get fired. I mean, this is not a particularly... This seat feels apparently very solid, but it's there is an ejector seat, as it were, in Broadcasting House. So there's frequent changes of management over the history of the BBC.
Mostly over controversy, or not?
Mostly over controversy. Mostly over controversy. Exactly. It's true.
Right.
But there is regular scrutiny of whether the BBC is living up to its public purposes, about the quality of its output.
But are you saying that there's no scrutiny of BskyB and all the newspapers that Murdoch owns? There's no scrutiny of that. There's no questioning of that, because, you know. People question Fox here all the time, with sometimes ridicule.
If I say so, press comment and public debate is one thing, but what I'm saying is that the accountability that I and the BBC are subject to is, as it were, we can be told to do things by our governing body. We can be told to stop services. We can be told to to change the direction of travel. So if a complaint is made, for example, from a member of the public about a particular news item which we've got wrong, or which this person claims, and the BBC Trust, the governing body, believes that complaint is justified, we have to change our journalism, accept that we made a mistake.
So the governing body could say, and whoever they are could say, we've gotten some political pressure here, we're concerned about the way you're doing this, and they could say, stop covering those stories the way you're covering them. You are on the wrong track and we don't approve of it, so stop it.
But all I would say is this process, I mean, the process, for example...
Is that what happens?
Well, but the process of considering program complaints itself happens, as it were, in public with, evidences, there are opportunities to give evidence, the findings are published. So, I mean, there's a complete system in place so that, if the BBC wants to launch a new service, there's a process to decide, and an external regulator, Ofcom, the equivalent of the FCC, has to look at the potential market impact of this service. There's a whole process for working out whether anything the BBC does might damage plurality, for example.
Have you seen evidences that the News Corp, for example, News Corp, in person of Rupert Murdoch and his son James Murdoch, are abusing their power?
What I want to say, the debate in the UK at the moment is simply a debate about whether the government should begin a process of looking at the question of
I understand what the debate is. I'm asking you, as you look at it, as the head of the BBC, do you see such abuse of power that it worries you and you want to bring it to the public's attention?
Well, specifically, what I was saying in Edinburgh was that I certainly think that the proposal to take 100% ownership of BskyB, for the reasons we've already talked about, raises questions which should be looked at. Now, the right thing to say is, when the competent authorities look at it, they can gather the evidence, they can look at whether there isn't a problem or there is a problem which requires remedy.
What would be Exhibit A you want them to look at?
Well, we should look at whether the combination, the loss of independent directors on BskyB, the potential connection between the editorial content...
Well, they already own a healthy share of it, so how is it different?
Currently there are independent directors and the editorial direction of BskyB and Sky News, its news arm, is separate from the management and direction of travel of their newspapers, The Sun, The Times and so forth. If the two were combined, there might be a significant loss of plurality in our media market. Now, in the end, it's for Vince Cable, the relevant minister, to decide whether he wants to refer this. And then there's a process, which again will be an open process, probably of Ofcom, the FCC equivalent, looking at the evidence and deciding whether or not there's a problem. So I think what we're saying is, we're not saying there's been a crime committed here. What we're saying is, given the scale of the potential ownership in UK media, there's a strong case for looking at it systematically and deciding whether or not anything needs to be done to address the issue.
Okay, but can I repeat what I think I hear you saying? It's not that they've done anything wrong, it's just that there's the potential of an abuse of power. We do not believe or say they abuse the power.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Fair enough.
I think that's a good way.
So you're not looking and saying, look here, this is where they...
I think that's a good way of putting it. And more than
not acted in the public interest.
I would not want to see anything done which would stop the continued potential of BskyB to go on adding to British television. The other thing I said, however, and it was actually the principal point I made in my speech at Edinburgh at the McTaggart, was that I would like to see BskyB spending more money on original British content. At the moment, a very, very small proportion of the enormous revenues they get goes into British talent, British ideas, British programmes.
Now, I wonder, when I hear you say that, I would wonder the following. Is he saying that because he just wants to jab them, or does he really care whether they create British content or not?
I really care.
Is it a debating point, or is it
it's
something that in the end he would...
It's real. What's happened, I mean, one of the reasons that Britain has had an outstanding television tradition of real quality, and not just the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and so forth.
And some people used to be at Channel 4, by the way.
I was.
and there's some people have argued that there was, at different times in independent television, more clever, better programming coming out of those places than the BBC. That the BBC lost its edge at times, and maybe that's why they hired you.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. I would agree that that the creative competition is good for audiences, and it's good for the BBC to have other people out there. And I think that some of the best programming ever made, which quite often it must be said American audiences assume was made by the BBC in the 70s and 80s, was made by others.
Yes, I know.
But what's happened...
If it comes from Britain, we think it's a BBC. What do we know?
It's not such a bad thing, Charlie. But what's happened is, because the model of the ad-funded broadcasters, not unlike the US networks, has become very compromised and difficult. The amount of money that companies like ITV and Channel 4 can put into programmes has diminished. Now, all the while, Sky's revenues have been growing and growing and growing, but they haven't been putting as much money in. So, although
what are they doing with the money that as their revenues grow, rather than putting it back in programming, they're doing what to expand?
There's been expansion, I mean, Sky. I mean, ITV is the principal commercial broadcaster in the UK. Sky, we think, spends more on its marketing budget than ITV can now spend making programmes. in the market. So I'm not suggesting that Sky needs to turn its model, its whole business model on its head, but I think a few hundred...
But it's a private enterprise. I mean, what, do you want to dictate how much money they spend on...
All I would say
you want to
is
dictate, do you want the government, not you, you want the government to say, we want you to spend 40% of every dollar you make, every profit, on public service programming. Would you like to see that?
Well, what I would say is we already have in the UK for some of the other commercial broadcasters, ITV is a good example, quotas. They have to spend 25% of their money on independent production. So the idea of quotas, which will be, you know, there will be another revolution in this country, it was suggested here, is not completely unknown in the UK. In other words,
and you think it's a good idea?
Well,
it would be a good idea to apply the same thing you apply to ITV.
In my view, by far the best route would be if Sky simply, as ITV did over the years, decided that in the end it made sense to play a significant role in our own creative industries in the country, rather than relying on imported programmes and on, you know, premier exclusive sports rights, to spend some money on British drama and comedy. And I think that by far the best thing would be if they did it, you know, in a sense, because that's part of what it is to be a great British broadcaster.
Why don't they do it, you think?
Well, I mean, I think that in the end, if I may say so, that's a question you should probably put to my colleagues at BskyB.
Well,
because I'm not convinced it's the wrong thing for them to do in business terms. I think they will be very successful at it.
Mr. Murdoch said about you and BBC, he said your ambitions were chilling, and that your online ambitions had to be dealt with.
Well, I think
are you saying we dealt with them because
our sin here is that we have a website which people really like to use. BBC News.
You're saying he's just jealous.
BBC News is not a new thing. We started it in the 1920s. It has a global reputation, has a very big reputation in the UK. I said 80% of the British public are using it, and not surprisingly, nowadays they want to get access to it on the web as well. And I think that although I accept that, particularly on the web, we need to think hard about what it is we do, what's the offer from the BBC, and why is the BBC doing it, and how does it live up to our values that inform and educate, particularly part of the equation. So I think it's fair to say, let's make sure that what we do on the web really feels like it should be the BBC doing it. But I think it would be madness for the BBC to say, you know what, we're not going to have a website, or we're not going to do news on our website.
It would be madness. I'm here to tell you.